Hey everyone, welcome back. We are here for another episode of Going Inside Live. This was a lot of fun to do last week, and so I'm really happy to be with you all again. Having a live component is just lots of fun, and it makes sure that, what I'm doing is hopefully relevant to you and timely and based on your actual questions and challenges that you're working through right now. So thanks for um, being here. As a reminder, you can either ask me a question here live on YouTube in the comments and I'll bring it up on screen. If you are courageous enough to come on live with me, you can email support@johnclarktherapy.com and we will send you a link to join this platform with me. And you can do some live consultation with me, like we did last week. So that is always an option. Let's get to our first question. This is from Andrew S. Andrew says, I have found using exercises from No Bad Parts, such as parts mapping or getting to know a protector, helpful. Then we process it afterwards. Do you see any potential pitfalls to this? It's a really good question. I mean, I think what you're generally asking is, to what degree is it safe to do IFS on my own? And there's a few ways to come at this question. One is, yes, I think it's generally safe to get to know your parts on your own. Where you can get into some deep waters is if you go and are working with very exiled parts of your system and you end up being blended with another part. So, for instance, um, I was just doing a demo inside of our Pathways to Self program, and we met an exile, and I checked, how are you feeling toward the part? And she said, well, it was good, but now feeling kind of annoyed. So then we turned toward this part that was we called the impatient part, or the client called the impatient part, and we're working with that one. So that could have gone off the rails. Essentially, if we bypass protector concerns, it can go off the rails and the work can be dangerous. So, in general, you do have to be careful. Now, I haven't even read it, but there's this whole article going around about, like, can IFS break you, or the therapy that can break you being IFS. Um, and I think the article, I think, probably written to be rage bait, and it's working because everyone's up in arms about it, aka super activated and blended because of it. One article. Um, the question is, like, can you do damage with any therapy, really? And I would argue that you can, in part because of the power imbalance between therapist and client and the vulnerability of being a client and the therapist knowing a lot about you and you knowing very little or next to nothing about the therapist. Also, people may be in very vulnerable mental states and having a mental health crisis. And so they're more vulnerable and their systems are more vulnerable to influence, whether it's with a narcissistic psychoanalyst or a narcissistic CBT therapist or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Now, is IFS potentially, can it be more harmful than, say, CBT? I would argue yes, it can, because it's so powerful. I don't know why this is, but the more I have gone into people's systems with them, the more I see and can respect the delicacy of it. Systems are very delicately designed, parts are very delicately positioned, and you can make a mess out of things. You can do damage. This is why the manual itself, the IFS manual for clinicians, recommends not working with exiles unless you've been trained by the Institute. That's a whole can of worms. But I at times have had parts up about that. And I also understand it. And I completely understand where Dick is coming from in putting in that out there. A lot of people go into other people's systems and they bulldoze and they bypass protectors and they get protector backlash and they fully dissociate people, or people could relapse or be suicidal, etc. So this work can be really dangerous because it's a really, really powerful method. So you have to honor that. So back to Andrew's question. Potential pitfalls are if you go past protectors and are working with exiles and have unintentionally bypassed your own protectors. Yes, that's a big pitfall, and you could really screw up your system, in my experience. But maybe, I think the best combination is a blend of doing your work on your own and doing work with a therapist and keeping it safe. Maybe saving the exile work for a therapist who's IFS trained. It also depends on your background, your trauma history, the degree and severity of your trauma history, the polarization of your system at large, and what parts you're working with, what type of content the parts are related to. So it depends on a lot of things. Yeah. Okay, we have a comment. I agree that Celtic girl. I agree. Anytime a therapist prioritizes their own comfort, own parts, or own agenda equals harm. Yeah, yeah, and this can be really subtle. I mean, even therapists, and you could be IFS trained, you could be IFS certified. It in a way it doesn't really matter because therapists and practitioners, doctors, whomever, can still abuse their power and they can be problematic and they can do damage no matter how well trained you are or institute trained or not or level 3 or not. So ultimately, a big part of being a good practitioner is discernment and respect and humility and reverence for people and their autonomy. Part of the trauma vortex is loss of agency, loss of autonomy, loss of choice. And so the counter vortex to that, the healing vortex, is choice, autonomy, respect, agency. And that starts with therapy. That starts with clients having a very, very high degree of choice in therapy. Do you want to do IFS today or not? Do you want to meet this week or not? Do you want to go toward that part or not? Do you want to get to know that part or not? Or something else, right? Do you want to go toward that sensation in your stomach or maybe not? Part of how we keep the work safe is we always default to the client and their system, and really to protectors. They are the gatekeepers. Susie says, how would you support a client who comes in reporting not remembering the last 3 years of their life except anchor points with the IFS practitioner? This would raise major red flags for me. The first thing I would think is, and this is not an IFS thing, but as a practitioner, a clinician, rule out any organic issues, meaning any medical issues, neurological issues, etc., that could be contributing to this issue. Not remembering the last 3 years of their life is pretty significant. Is there brain damage? Is there dementia? Is there something neurological, biological going on? So that'd be the first thing to rule out. The second thing would be if this is purely a psychological, psychiatric issue in nature, I'd be very curious why this level of dissociation has occurred and is occurring. It's significant, right? Something so horrific must have happened that parts that dissociate go, I'm taking you offline, or I'm taking you offline for 3 years, except for these anchor points with the IFS practitioner, which is also interesting. So if this is your client, Susie, maybe you're doing direct access and maybe you're accessing their parts and maybe that's why they can and are remembering something or just remembering, stuff for, stuff from a session or whatever it is. But I would have real concerns. I would also want to rule out, schizophrenia or something along these lines. And again, this is a non-IFS answer because IFS is non-pathologizing. And I think it's 99% of the time important to be non-pathologizing, except in the cases of something a lot more severe and sinister going on where diagnosis can really help and medication can really help. So if there's something this severe, you have to rule out organic causes. You have to rule out psychosis of some kind. You have to rule out DID, dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder. you have to rule that out. You have to be curious about that, right? Because again, it's pretty extreme to not remember the past 3 years of your life. Yeah, I would get extra consulting around this case if I were you. And maybe this is already the work that you do, so you're in your wheelhouse, but um, I would want to get extra consulting. If you're here live, ask your questions in the comments. I'd love to answer some live questions. Otherwise, I'll answer another pre-submitted question. If you want to submit a question next time, you can just email support@johnclarktherapy.com. If you want to come on live with me, which would be my preference, and do some live consulting, email support@johnclarktherapy.com, and we can bring you on when we meet again in 2 weeks from now. Another question from Arsha. The question is, please explain the concept of polarization with parts, perhaps with a common pattern or set of parts that you may see in cases of addiction, and how a practitioner might go about working with this. Yeah, this is a really good question, and a really kind of an easy one to answer, I guess, especially since you've set me up so well with the addiction question. A classic polarization is you have a firefighter part that says, you know, I went through this a day at work. I got some difficult feedback from my boss. And even though I got through that moment, I got home and I started to think about how that felt, and it felt really bad. And a part that holds shame got activated when I was thinking about it. So a firefighter part that likes to drink said, screw it, or F it, let's drink. And let's drink 1 or 2 or 3 or 7 or 17 beers or whatever. And another part, you would call it a manager, says, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's not healthy. This is an issue. You're probably an alcoholic. You're going to destroy your liver or worse, right? And the firefighter part says, I don't really give a damn because my method works. It gets us distance from this pain and shame, right? It quells the exile. So that's the polarization, right? You've got think of it as two people on the same team that want something good for the team, but they fundamentally and profoundly disagree about how to do it, right? Let's drink a lot. Let's drink until we can't feel anymore. And the other part is like, this is terrible. This is not good for you. Drinking is not okay. You have to go to work tomorrow, right? A part of you that says we should lose weight, a part of you that says, screw it, let's eat, right? You could also have two managers that are polarized. You can have a manager polarized with an exile. You could have, I mentioned before, a demo that we just did in Pathways program where there was some polarization between an exile and a manager part that was kind of annoyed with the exile, or the word was impatient. That's a polarization as well, right? It's just a charge in the system. And in IFS, we primarily go toward the charge and we work with the charge or the charges inside the system. And we try to bring peace and love and harmony to it. That's really the whole model in a single breath. And in that regard, the model's not that complicated. We have a way of making it complicated because we get all out of sorts about like protector or exile or this or, do you flesh it out first or do you ask the age second or whatever? And these are all just, it's a modular system that is used to work with someone's system, but it's an art. So don't forget that the whole thing is an art. Psychotherapy is an art. IFS is an art. And so your application of it is going to depend on your artistry, which is different than mine, right? Is the work correct? Are you following the model or following the steps? Really, it's like, is the work beautiful and meaningful? And is there love in the session? Is there warmth and compassion in the session? Besides that, you feel free to improvise, feel free to be creative, one of your C qualities, feel free to try stuff, feel free to involve the body or art or nature in your IFS or whatever. You're a practitioner and you've been, for many of you, licensed and approved by your board or whatever to apply techniques discerningly. So go do that and talk to the client about how it's going. Talk to the client about how they're liking IFS. How was this moment for you? How was this session for you? Keep working on the contracting piece of therapy. 3 levels of contracting. What are we working on? What are we working on today? What are we working on in this moment? How do you want to be helped? And you make that explicit over and over again ad nauseum. Okay, so to Arsha's question, how do you work with the polarization? Well, you work with the part that's the loudest. At least that's how you start. So if the loudest one is the part that says, screw it, let's drink, let's freaking go, baby, you know, you work with that part first and foremost, because that one is here and it's here now and it's got the microphone. So you work with it and go, yeah, you've got the microphone. Tell me what could be good about drinking. When did you start doing it? Why did you start doing it? What do you fear would happen if you didn't drink, if you just sat with the shame, after a long day or after a difficult conversation or whatever? And you do that line of questioning, you do the downward arrow technique. What do you fear would happen if? Okay, and then what would that mean? And what would that mean? And what would that mean? That's how you get to the core fear, or the core wounding of it. And at some point, you connect the polarized parts to self. That's the internal attachment work we're doing. And they trust and can be led by self. And then self is in the driver's seat, and self can decide to have a drink or 0 or 7 or whatever. Self can stay in the driver's seat when you're getting difficult feedback at work or whatever. So that's kind of how we do it. And really, you want to hear from both parts. So you would invite the part that drinks and the part that doesn't approve of the drinking. Invite them both to the table, a physical table, you could imagine that, a campfire, whatever. Keep them connected to self and have self hear them out lovingly and compassionately. These parts might need to be unburdened if that's relevant and if that, kind of comes up. Yeah, if that happens naturally. So I hope that helps. Got one more question from Jenny. Jenny, thanks for coming. And yeah, that's the last question we have. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I'll be running out here pretty soon. Jenny says, what do you recommend aftercare look like post IFS sessions? It's a really good question. The first thing I would say is tend to any parts that have immediate fears or concerns. So if you have capacity to, after your own session or you're advising a client, it would be to do some of that follow-up with their own system if they are capable of doing that and they're familiar enough with the model and have enough self-energy. Can you tend to the parts, the ones you were just working with? Stay connected to them, foster that connection with them, debrief with them, talk about follow-up, what follow-up will look like with them. And you only want to make a promise that you could actually keep. So if there is a promise to be made, you would make that promise with the part. Again, you're rebuilding trust. It's relational repair is what the model is about. Repairing internal attachments. And then by nature of that, you end up repairing external attachments. When I'm more self-led, I can repair my external relationships and attachments. And my attachment with others is less high stakes because I have stronger internal attachment between me and my parts. So I don't get all bent out of shape when people hurt me or disappoint me or are inconsistently there for me or whatever. That's kind of a byproduct of the work, a positive byproduct. Otherwise, what does it look like after sessions? Well, I don't know. What does it look like after a really good workout or after a physical therapy session or after a massage or whatever? So it might just look like self-care. It might look like connecting with nature, a walk in the woods. It might look like connecting with water. I'd be a big fan of that. It might look like changing your clothes. Maybe you light a candle during your sessions and then blow it out at the end. That's a Kelly Higdon thing, one of my friends and a great therapist and coach. Yeah, you might create some ritual around it. You might make art. You could make art about what happened. You could make art from the perspective of a part. You could, yeah, listen to music. You could dance. Basically connect with your self energy. You could journal about what happened in the session. That could be helpful for your system and your process for tracking what's actually happening and remembering what happened in session. Yeah, Janice thinks that's I had a therapist tell me to drink water and eat protein. Yeah, whatever works to take care of yourself. And part of what we want to do as a practitioner is help clients leave the room zipped up, right? Reasonably zipped up again. Put things back in, put things back in. And we want to spend, 5-10 minutes at the end of the session really just kind of chatting and debriefing and even talking about what happened here today. Sometimes clients need to chat about other stuff just to kind of get regulated again and co-regulate, and that's very normal and very important. So I would recommend that actually. Really think about how to land the plane as a practitioner. 5, 10, 15 minutes before the session, give a client the warning. Hey, we've got about 15 minutes left. Where do you want to go from here? Or, hey, we've got 10 minutes left. Does it make sense to go deeper? Does it make sense to start wrapping up? Check and see if you have a sense for what your parts need, what your system needs. Yeah. Another question from Marianne. Thanks for your live questions here. Marianne says, what level is IFS applied in alters? Meaning there are many levels in which alters could show up in the most extreme case. SRA or specific military MK. Is IFS ever been known to be used at that level? Well, what I think you're talking about is DID, dissociative identity disorder, and alters of the multiple personalities. The short answer is yes, IFS can be great for DID. I've worked with DID a bit. My mentor works with DID a lot. You would approach it in a pretty similar fashion, meaning you start with protectors and you work with protectors and you get that protector consent, and they're basically the gatekeepers. With DID, there's usually one particular protector who is kind of like the ultimate gatekeeper, right? Kind of like the host, the part or the personality that kind of dictates everything else and is kind of the one in charge. So in working with DID, you would primarily and first and foremost work with this part or this personality, this alter or sub-personality, right? Yeah. And you might apply some of the same concepts of IFS. Befriending, exploring fears, exploring the history of those fears, the origin, right? Yeah. I know that Dick Schwartz did an interview with Tammy Solenberg on her podcast, The One Inside, with Dick Schwartz and someone who has DID, and they talked about it. Because some DID folks are not stoked about IFS, from what I can understand from that interview. But it's not necessarily like my wheelhouse. So I'm fascinated in it, and I'd like to work with DID more. In my experience, DID is an extreme splitting of the subpersonalities, extreme splitting or polarization of the parts, and self is more fractured. Self and self energy is more fractured. They have limited access to self or virtually no access to self. So you'd be doing pretty much all direct access work with these clients until further notice, until you can build a bridge between one of their parts and their self energy, which could take months or years. And in my experience, you really just see DID with cases of extreme childhood trauma and abuse, often sexual in nature. A lot of times comes from the family, etc. So horrific levels of abuse. And the personality structure essentially splits and says, this is too much. So I'm going to split off entirely, right? Until further notice, until it's safe to be here again. Part of how therapy helps is over time, we make it safe or safer to kind of be here again. That's how it works, right? Yeah. Good question. Those are all the pre-written questions I have and all the live questions I have for now. If you're here live and have another question, feel free to ask it. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping up. I'm going to be doing this again in 2 weeks from today. So I'll be off next week for the holiday and then back at it on December 2nd at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. That's going to be the next one. So again, submit your question ahead of time or request to come on here live with me on video and get some free consulting and supervision. You can just email support@johnclarktherapy.com if you're interested in that opportunity. Otherwise, if you like this sort of help and like the way that I approach this stuff, I would encourage you to consider joining Pathways to Self. Pathways is my membership program where you get access to a community, you get access to my courses, and you get access to a weekly consult call with me and a small group of clinicians, five to 8 clinicians or so on Zoom every single week, where you can come and ask me questions and get real consulting and help and be part of our community and be less alone as a practitioner. We are going to do away with the founder pricing soon. So if you're interested, you can join right now for $99 a month, which I think is a steal for the amount of help and support you're getting and the level of support. But that price is going to go away soon. So if you want to lock in founder's pricing of $99 a month, go to johnclarktherapy.com/pathways. I will answer one more since I got one. The Celtic Girl is asking, what guidance can you offer on stability to a client who discloses being in an abusive environment? This is a fantastic question. And in my experience, the work is limited while someone is actively in, and especially living in, an abusive environment or living with an abusive person. If a lot of the work is about the abuse and about that abusive person, it's really hard to do good work while they're still in it. That doesn't mean you can't. That doesn't mean you can't work on your core IFS skills like unblending and building self-energy and finding a way to survive the situation that they're in. But in my experience, and especially with folks who are seeking things like EMDR and doing trauma reprocessing work, memory reprocessing work, I don't think you should be doing that reprocessing work while they're still in it. Right? Like if someone's going through a really hard divorce and they're still going through it, in my experience, it doesn't make sense to like really do that reprocessing work until some safety is established and some a next step is established, or they've gotten physical distance from the abusive environment/person. So in the meantime, what do? You help them build a bridge, you help them dig a tunnel. Right? It might look like more solution focused work to help them get out of this abusive environment or situation if they even want to, which they might not. In a lot of cases, people don't want to, or they're not ready, or it's too scary to leave the abusive person. So there's a lot of pitfalls in that type of situation where people will stay in those situations for years knowing it's abusive, but having so much fear and codependence around leaving or putting their foot down saying this is not okay. Or there's parts that find it familiar. This is what I'm used to. This is what I know. And so parts tend to seek out that same familiarity, even if it is seeking out an abusive person, an abusive demanding partner, whatever. We tend to recreate our wounding. And a lot of times, physical and romantic attraction is coming from our wounding. that's a lot of times what initially draws us together, is also like that spark can be directly coming from our core wounding. Your wounded part connecting with their wounded part. Fun times. Hope that was helpful. Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, we got a bunch of people here live, which I really appreciate you being here live. It's really fun for me. It gives this kind of a new flavor. I'm going to play around with having like a co-host in a few weeks. It's a therapist who reached out and was interested in kind of doing his own podcast. He's a newer therapist, but I think would be good for, as like a co-host or a sidekick. So we'll see how that goes, and if if that's something that we decide to keep doing or just as a one-off. But the more I can make this content interactive with you, the better. If you've been enjoying the content, just you can do me a favor by either joining Pathways to Self and or just sharing the content with people. Share your favorite episode with someone, whether it's a YouTube version or Spotify or Apple Music, whatever, iTunes. Share the show with a couple people, other practitioners, other people that are interested in IFS, whether you're a practitioner or you're a client, you're a consumer, and you enjoy listening to the show. So my kind of dream is to do like a call-in show. So really, I love these questions where people could call in, either audio, they could leave a voicemail, or even come on screen like we did last week with someone. So that was cool. Lawrence says, I'm learning IFS at the moment, so these are fantastic. We'll come again. Yeah, thanks, Lawrence, and congrats on learning IFS. And it's a journey. It really is like learning an art. So enjoy that process of learning. And thank you for being here. Yeah, I do these because I want to be as helpful as possible, and I love therapy, and I love IFS, and I love the art of all of it. So I'm just always interested to go further with this stuff. And I do a lot of teaching these days, whether it's with Pathways to Self or teaching at my group practice, Calm Again Counseling. I'm going to be, teaching some master students next year, teaching a theories course. So I just love teaching and mentoring, and have a big heart for it. So a lot of heart for it, I guess. Lawrence says, thanks from Australia. You're keeping me company for breakfast. Yeah. There's a lot of Australians who like IFS. I don't know what the correlation is there, but that's really cool. Another comment, thank you for doing this. Your podcast is super, super helpful to me as a practitioner. Yeah, thank you for that. And you're very welcome. Marianne says, what was the name of the person Dick Schwartz was interviewing with DID? I don't remember. So if you look up Tammy Sollenberger, it's the One Inside, and her interview with Dick Schwartz and a person with DID. Yeah. Let's see if I could find it. If not, it's yeah, okay. So bridging IFS and the plural community with Dick Schwartz and Tiffany Ocean Morgan. So if you just Google that, you should be able to find it. I could probably even just put a link here, post a comment, boom. Yeah, it's a good interview, really interesting one. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll pause for today. Answered a lot of questions, had a lot of fun, my version of fun. And I will see you all again 2 weeks from now, same time and place on YouTube or wherever. And that'll be 2 weeks from now. And it'll be again 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and whatever the hell time it is in Australia. So there you go. Thanks again for being here. I really appreciate you all, and thank you for supporting me. It means a lot, and keep coming back. See you soon. Thanks again.